Welcome to LEWS Podcast. You've tuned into The Deep Dive, the show where we slice through stacks of research, articles, and expert notes. Our goal, to bring you the most essential, surprising, and actionable nuggets of knowledge. Today we're tackling a really fascinating challenge, one that so many language learners face. How do you truly speak like a native in your target language? We've got a comprehensive, research-based guide right here, and it's filled with insights that, honestly, go way beyond your typical language textbook. Our mission, as always, is to give you that shortcut. To being incredibly well informed on this topic, extracting not just facts, but those surprising truths and practical strategies that can genuinely transform your language journey.
Exactly. And this isn't about simply, say, adding more vocabulary flashcards or just reciting grammar rules. The sources we're looking at today explore, well, every dimension, from the subtle, almost imperceptible nuances of sound, all the way to the deeper, often unwritten cultural aspects of how people actually communicate. It's really about building a truly holistic understanding. And crucially, learning how to mindfully internalize the language so it becomes, a natural extension of your thoughts, not just something you consciously translate or recite word for word.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the start then. When we talk about sounding native, it's definitely more than just getting individual sounds right, isn't it? It feels like there's a whole musicality to language, a rhythm and a flow, something often overlooked, especially early on. I'm curious, what does the research say is the most impactful aspect of that musicality?
That's a great question, and the research really zeroes in on something called prosody. What's truly insightful here, I think, is that learners who manage to achieve native-like prosody, and that's the intonation, the stress patterns, the rhythm, really the whole melody of speech,
Yeah.
they are judged as far more fluent and, interestingly, more credible by native speakers. Even if their individual sounds aren't always absolutely perfect, it's not just about hitting each sound precisely. It's about conveying the full spectrum of meaning, emotion, intent. Think about a simple phrase like, "I didn't do it."
Oh, yeah.
Depending just on the prosody, the melody, that can convey innocence or defiance or maybe even sarcasm. Mastering this isn't just about sounding fluent, it's about conveying depth. That's a massive shortcut to deeper communication.
That makes so much sense. It's like the emotional subtext hiding in the sounds.
Yeah.
So how do we actually go about getting that melody right? Sounds a bit abstract, almost like something you either have or you don't. Does the research point to specific exercises, or is it more about just, listening a lot and hoping it sinks in?
Oh, it's definitely not just passive listening. No. The sources highlight very practical, active approaches. Things like systematic phonetic drills and something called shadowing. For instance, if you're trying to nail a tricky target language sound, like the English thooth, perhaps,
Always a tough one.
right, you'd practice specific targeted phonetic exercises designed to train your tongue and mouth muscles. Then, with shadowing, you actively listen to a native speaker and immediately try to imitate them. You're literally shadowing their words, their intonation, their rhythm as closely as possible. You record yourself, crucially, then compare your accent and rhythm directly to native speakers. This lets you pinpoint those minute mismatches, those subtle differences in intonation or where you're putting the stress. It's really about training both your ear to hear the nuances and your mouth to produce them accurately, building new muscle memory for speech.
Right. Active imitation, not just passive listening. Got it. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for a lot of learners, I think. It's not just the pronunciation. It's about how actual native speakers talk in everyday life. What are the subtle patterns, the quirks we should be looking for beyond just the sounds? The things that make speech sound effortless and natural.
Yeah, and that raises a really important question. How do you blend in naturally beyond just having clear pronunciation? The guide we looked at emphasizes moving past individual words to embrace larger linguistic units, or chunks. This means learning not just idioms, those wonderfully quirky phrases like spill the beans or bite the bullet.
Which often make no literal sense.
Exactly. But also learning softeners like a bit or kind of, which are absolutely crucial for politeness and sounding less, well, blunt. And then there are common discourse markers, things like, or like, or so. People often dismiss them as filler words, but they're actually really important for natural conversation flow, signaling turns, that sort of thing. And of course, contractions, it's don't, can't, are just essential for fluidity. The core idea here is about building mental templates, focusing on fixed phrases and collocations.
Collocations, like words that usually go together.
Precisely, like heavy rain, not strong rain, or make a decision, not do a decision. Think hit the nail on the head, instead of trying to strike the fastener precisely on its uppermost part. You're not piecing together every single word individually. The research shows focusing on these chunks makes your speech far more natural and effortless.
So less word-by-word translation happening in your head and more like embracing these natural chunks of language, almost like you're loading up pre-built Lego structures instead of grabbing individual bricks every time.
That's a great analogy, actually.
That makes so much sense for achieving fluency. But for someone who's maybe spent years thinking word by word, are there any specific strategies for kind of unlearning that habit and making the switch to focusing on these chunks?
That's a really common hurdle. The best strategy is consistent, targeted exposure, and crucially, active use. Think of it like this. Instead of always assembling very happy or extremely sad, a native speaker might instinctively reach for over the moon or down in the dumps. To unlearn that word-by-word habit, you have to actively seek out and notice these collocations and idioms as you read and listen. Make a note of them. Then, the key is to make a conscious effort to use them. Start small. Maybe aim for a handful each week. Integrate them into your practice conversations you're writing. The more you produce these prepackaged units, the more they become ingrained, and slowly they start to replace the need for that individual word construction. It's really about recognizing and then actively using those established linguistic units that native speakers rely on without even thinking.
Building on that idea then, internalizing natural speech. Once you have a better handle on the sounds and these natural patterns, how do you truly immerse yourself in a way that really pushes you towards that native-like fluency? Because it feels like just being around the language passively isn't always enough to make that big leap.
You're right. Passive exposure has its limits. Immersion is absolutely critical, but the sources suggest two very specific things to make it profoundly more effective. First, stick to one accent, at least initially. For instance, if you're aiming for, say, American English, focus solely on that. Actively avoid switching between American and British or Australian accents too early on. Trying to master multiple accents simultaneously can actually lead to confusion and slow your progress in achieving a cohesive native-like sound.
Consistency is key there. Okay.
Second, and this is really crucial, engage in active immersion. Not just listening or reading passively. This means things like tandem exchanges, where you teach your native language and learn your target language with a partner, and also engaging in highly structured communicative practice. It's not just passive absorption, it's active production and interaction.
Right. What exactly does structured communicative practice look like, though? I can imagine a tandem exchange, just chatting, but structured practice sounds a bit like a classroom setting again, which, some learners might want to move away from.
It's different from a traditional grammar-focused classroom, definitely. The focus is on authentic, spontaneous interaction, but in a slightly more controlled, low-stakes environment. Think role plays, for example, or mock interviews for a job, or even organized conversation circles with a specific goal, like discussing current events, planning a fictional trip, or maybe solving a hypothetical problem together. These aren't just casual chats. They're designed to promote spontaneity and build fluency in scenarios that mimic real-life speaking situations. For instance, a role play might involve ordering food or negotiating a price or resolving a minor conflict, perhaps.
Ah, okay. Situations that demand quick thinking and natural language use.
Exactly. They help you actively adjust to natural speech patterns and understand cultural usage in a controlled, supportive environment. Which is significantly more effective, the research suggests, than just sort of stumbling through a completely unstructured conversation and hoping for the best.
Makes sense. And while we're talking about words and using them naturally, it's easy to assume vocabulary is just about memorizing more words, right? More flashcards.
Yeah.
But the research clearly dives deeper. There's a big difference between just memorizing words from a list and truly knowing them, understanding their nuances, how they're actually used in context. What's the secret to building a truly native-like vocabulary?
Absolutely. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, it's not just about knowing a word's dictionary definition. It's about internalizing how those words are actually used in real context, alongside other words, those collocations we mentioned. The recommendation from the sources is pretty clear. Read and listen extensively. Basically, flood yourself with authentic content. Books, podcasts, TV shows, films, even native language social media feeds, whatever interests you. This isn't just for comprehension practice. It's crucial for the subconscious internalization of realistic word usage and those vital collocations. You start to develop a feel for when a word sounds right in a certain context, even if you can't quite articulate the grammatical rule behind it.
That intuitive sense, and for actually remembering them. So they stick around, not just for a test, but for life. so you can actually recall them fluidly in conversation. What about avoiding that trap of just rote memorization?
Yeah, rote memorization alone isn't very effective long term. That's where a strategic combination comes in. Yes, spaced repetition systems, SRS, like you find in digital flashcard apps like Anki, are incredibly effective for scheduling reviews and combating forgetting. But, and this is key, don't stop there. Pair that spaced repetition with contextual, meaningful memory aids, mnemonics. But not just any mnemonic. Connect the word to something memorable and personal, maybe a vivid story, a really silly image, or even a strong emotion. The research actually points to a breakthrough when you activate multiple senses or strong emotions with your mnemonics. That creates truly unforgettable mental anchors for words, much better than just linking to a generic picture. For instance, if you're learning a word that sounds like a familiar English word, create a bizarre, unforgettable mental scene where both words are interacting somehow. This combination helps you retain vocabulary far more effectively and, importantly, retrieve it more quickly during actual conversation compared to simple rote learning.
That makes sense, engaging more of your brain. Now, this next part feels like where it gets really subtle, and maybe the hardest part to truly master. The kind of knowledge that really separates a very advanced learner from someone who sounds native. I'm talking about the cultural and pragmatic nuances. It's not just what you say, but how you say it, what's implied, what gestures might go with it.
You've hit on something crucial there. What's fascinating is this field called interlanguage pragmatics. Think of it like this. Every culture has its own unspoken rules, its own social dance for how you do things with words. Things like making a request, apologizing politely, giving or receiving compliments, disagreeing respectfully. These are called speech acts.
Hmm.
And the way you perform these acts, the phrasing you use, the level of directness, it varies hugely across cultures. Without understanding this, you could say something grammatically perfect, but still inadvertently sound rude or demanding, or maybe insincere in another culture.
Oof, yeah. You could completely undermine your message without even realizing it.
Exactly. A direct "give me water" might be grammatically fine, but culturally very blunt in many English-speaking contexts, where a native speaker would likely say something like, "Could I possibly get some water, please?" Or, "I was wondering if I could trouble you for some water." And it's not just about the words either, it's also about the nonverbal signals, gestures, body language, eye contact, facial expressions. These often differ significantly cross-culturally. A head shake meaning no here might mean yes somewhere else, or just "I'm listening." Muff. So to truly sound native, you need to observe and emulate those native communication styles, the whole package, not just the spoken words.
That's such a powerful point. It really drives home how intertwined language and culture are. Can you give us maybe just one quick, common example of a cultural misstep someone might make if they don't grasp these pragmatic nuances?
Sure. Consider giving compliments, as I mentioned. In some cultures, like maybe parts of the US, directly praising someone's appearance or their belongings is pretty normal, seen as friendly. In other cultures, that same direct compliment might be perceived as intrusive, overly personal, or could even make the recipient uncomfortable, perhaps implying envy. Or think about interrupting. In some conversational cultures, jumping in shows active engagement and enthusiasm. In others, it's considered extremely rude and strict turn-taking is expected. Understanding these unwritten rules really means observing beyond the dictionary, paying attention to context, watching how native speakers actually interact in their own environment.
Fascinating. So what does all this mean for leveraging modern tools in this journey? It feels like technology has really changed the game for language learning, especially maybe for some of these finer points like pronunciation.
Oh, absolutely. Technology offers incredible support, especially for pronunciation and getting that crucial immediate feedback. There are computer-aided pronunciation training systems, CAPT systems. One mentioned in the sources is called Peacher. These are pretty revolutionary. They can often deliver exaggerated, personalized feedback in real time, pinpointing exactly where your sound production deviates from a native speaker model. This kind of immediate, precise feedback can dramatically accelerate pronunciation improvement, much faster than just relying on occasional corrections in a classroom. And for those with very specific goals, maybe for professional reasons or public speaking, focused accent reduction coaching can also significantly enhance clarity and intelligibility.
That real-time feedback sounds incredibly useful. And what about for those learners who might feel a bit shy or anxious about speaking? The ones who want to practice but maybe aren't ready for a full-on conversation with another person yet.
Yeah, performance anxiety is real. And that's where things like virtual reality and gamified practice can be incredibly helpful. Imagine practicing ordering coffee in a virtual cafe in Paris, or trying to navigate a busy train station in Tokyo. actually speaking to AI characters. These environments simulate realistic speaking scenarios, allowing you to practice in a completely low-stakes setting.
Mhm.
This really helps reduce anxiety and can make the whole practice process much more engaging and, well, fun. It builds confidence before you step into those higher-stakes real-world interactions.
Okay, so we have the sounds, the patterns, immersion, vocabulary, culture, tech. But it's not just about the techniques and tools, is it? The mental approach, the mindset you bring to learning seems just as crucial as any specific method.
Yeah.
What does the research say about the most effective mindset for someone aiming for that native-like fluency?
You're absolutely right. Mindset is foundational. What's really insightful here is the emphasis the sources place on it. They are very clear. Errors are not setbacks. They are evidence of progress. They show you're trying, you're pushing boundaries. Native speakers, by and large, don't expect perfection from learners. They genuinely tolerate mistakes. Their focus is usually on communication, on understanding your meaning, not on flawless grammar. So a learner who embraces errors as valuable learning opportunities will progress much, much faster than one who's paralyzed by the fear of making them. Another crucial aspect is setting a goal-oriented routine. But this doesn't mean huge, overwhelming study blocks. It's more about small, consistent commitments. Maybe daily 5-minute chats with an AI tutor, or committing to using, say, 3 new target phrases in conversations each week. The key is building that consistency, making learning a non-negotiable habit, however small.
Embracing imperfection and building habits. Makes sense. And what would you say is the ultimate mental shift, the real game changer for someone striving for native-like fluency? Is it truly possible to stop translating everything in your head?
It absolutely is possible, and achieving that is arguably the biggest leap towards genuine fluency. It's about training your mind to process thoughts directly in the target language. Eliminating that constant internal translation step where you formulate the thought in your native tongue and then mentally convert it is huge. It's about building direct neural pathways for the new language, so concepts flow directly into target language words and phrases without that detour through your native tongue. It definitely takes time and conscious, deliberate practice, things like narrating your day to yourself internally in the target language or trying to think through problems directly in that language, but it is transformative when it starts to happen.
Wow. Thinking directly in the language. That feels like the holy grail.
Yeah.
Fine, let's touch on the journey itself and some common roadblocks, because it's rarely a smooth, straight line from beginner to native-like, is it? We all hit plateaus or get tripped up by our old language habits coming through.
Not at all. It's definitely a journey with ups and downs. Language learning involves continuous development stages, moving from basic competency through intermediate plateaus up to advanced levels. The key here is recognizing that it is a process and tailoring your strategies to your current level. What worked as a beginner might not be what you need at an advanced stage. You need to diagnose where you are and focus on the specific challenges for that level. Also, your native language, your L1, inevitably shapes how you perceive and produce the target language. This is called L1 interference. It's a powerful, often subconscious force that affects pronunciation, grammar, even word choice. For example, if your native language doesn't have articles like a or the, you might consistently forget them in English.
Or use sounds from your first language.
Exactly. Or apply grammatical structures that work perfectly in your L1 but sound wrong or unnatural in the target language. What's crucial is developing an awareness of this L1 influence. Once you're aware of how your native language might be tripping you up, you can actively work to correct for it, whether it's focusing on specific sounds, drilling particular grammar points, or learning more natural word usage. It's like becoming a detective of your own linguistic habits.
Okay, so bringing this all together.
Yeah.
What does this mean for putting it into practice? Sounds like a lot of different pieces to juggle.
Hmm.
But the sources even give us a kind of sample plan, right? What does a truly multifaceted, research-backed approach look like day to day or week to week?
Right. If we connect all these threads, the big takeaway is that truly speaking, like a native, requires a balanced, multifaceted approach. You can't just focus on one thing. It's about combining that precise pronunciation work with adopting natural phrasing in chunks, engaging in deep, active immersion, not just passive listening, and cultivating a profound understanding of those cultural and pragmatic insights we discussed. All of this needs to be guided by consistent, deliberate practice and intelligently supported by the right technology for feedback and motivation. It's fundamentally about mindfully internalizing the language, letting it become a natural part of how you think and express yourself, rather than just a set of rules and words you've memorized. The sample plan suggested by the research is quite practical and manageable, actually. It includes things like maybe 10 to 15 minutes daily dedicated specifically to pronunciation and shadowing drills, really refining your sound and rhythm. Committing to learning, say, 5 new idioms or common collocations or softeners weekly, and actively trying to integrate them into your speech and writing. Dedicating at least 30 minutes every day to immersive reading or listening, flooding your brain with authentic language input. And crucially, making sure to have at least one native language tandem call or some kind of a structured practice session every single week. That puts everything into action and gives you that vital real-time interaction and feedback. Each piece really reinforces the others, creating a powerful cumulative effect over time.
That sounds like a really solid, actionable framework. We've covered so much ground today. From the subtle, almost hidden melodies of prosody and the surprising power of nonverbal cues, all the way to the truly transformative potential of training your mind to think directly in your target language. This deep dive has definitely shown us that achieving true native-like fluency isn't just about knowing more words or grammar rules. It's about truly embodying the language in all its cultural richness and nuanced glory, almost like stepping into a slightly different version of yourself.
Indeed. It really is a journey of continuous refinement, and as we discussed, understanding that every mistake is actually a necessary step forward, and remembering that language is so deeply, deeply intertwined with culture. It's a reflection of how people think, how they see the world, how they interact. Unlocking that deeper level of understanding is, I think, the real reward beyond just communication.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you're listening to this, what stands out most to you from today's discussion? Maybe take a moment to reflect. How might embracing those unwritten rules of a language, those cultural and pragmatic nuances we talked about, how might that transform your understanding of its speakers? Going beyond just clear communication, could it actually offer a window into another way of seeing the world, of connecting on a much deeper level? Isn't that perhaps the real magic we're all chasing when we learn a language? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this is giving you plenty to think about, and more importantly, some concrete things to implement on your own language journey.